As far as role models, I think, there's obviously some of the obvious role models. I think Edison was certainly a role model, probably one of the biggest role models.
Did you study Edison's life? Or?
Yeah, I read books about him, absolutely. And it's an interesting contrast, like Edison versus Tesla, because interesting, the car company is called Tesla. And the reason it's called Tesla is because we use an AC induction motor, which is an architecture that Tesla developed. And the guy probably deserves a little more play than he gets in current society. But on balance, I'm a bigger fan of Edison than Tesla. Because Edison brought his stuff to market and made those inventions accessible to the world, whereas Tesla didn't really do that.
Right.
So he'd certainly be a big one. I think the great technologists, Steve Jobs at Apple, Bill Gates. I actually thought Disney was a pretty good innovator. And then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week.
Gosh,
and
that's
then
a lot of work.
All those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve.
Are you motivated beyond just profit motive and racking up dollars? And
no, I'm a volunteer. I mean, I don't need the money. There's nothing. It's not like I'm sitting here saying I wish I could buy such and such a thing. I could buy it. I get paid minimum wage. Actually, I don't even get overtime. But not being motivated personally by money is not the same as saying that I think SpaceX shouldn't make money. In fact, it's very important that SpaceX is profitable, or we will not be able to earn the money necessary to continue future developments. Because the company's at a scale right now where I can't afford to just personally fund it and not get any, and not if we don't generate any revenue. We have to sort of earn our keep because we're a pretty big company right now. Well, it's like the Nike slogan, just do it. That's just showing up is half the battle. Just you got to try hard to do it, and don't be afraid of failure. You also need to be rooted in reality. So you shouldn't. It's easy to get high in your own supply, as Scarface said. You've got to not be afraid to innovate, but also don't delude yourself into thinking something's working when it's not, or you're going to get fixated on a bad solution. Yeah, and I think also just don't be afraid of new arenas. You can get a book, you can learn something, and experiment with your hands, and just make it happen. Find a way or make a way to get something done. Well, I think it's really a mindset. You have to decide we're going to try to do things differently. Well, provided that they're better. You shouldn't do things differently just because they're different. They need to be different and better. But I think you just have to sort of decide. Let's think beyond the normal stuff and have an environment where that sort of thinking is encouraged and rewarded, and where it's okay to fail as well. Because when you try new things, you try this idea, that idea, well, a large number of them are not going to work, and that has to be okay. If every time somebody comes up with an idea that has to be successful, you're not going to get people coming up with ideas.
Well, I mean, those are pretty different personalities, between Gates and Jobs and Ellison.
Business and success.
I think all three of those were technologists, but with different types of skills. Jobs was obviously very good with aesthetics, and he understood technology, of course, and he really understood what people wanted, even when they didn't know themselves. And he was not afraid to break boundaries. But like Gates would probably be better at sort of raw engineering and technology than Jobs, but not as good on aesthetics. But I mean, for all of these guys, they're obviously very driven, and they're very talented, and yeah, and they're able to attract great people to build a company. But I mean, the ability to attract and motivate great people is critical to the success of a company, because a company is it's a group of people that are assembled to create a product or service. That's the purpose of a company. People sometimes forget this elementary truth, and so if if you're able to get great people to join the company and work together towards a common goal, and you sort of have a relentless sense of perfection about that goal, then you will end up with a great product. And if you have a great product, lots of people will buy it, and then the company will be successful.
Yeah.
Really, it's pretty straightforward, really.
I think the United States is more open to new ideas than any country in the world, and I think it's becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, in that because the United States is open to new ideas, it attracted people from around the world who had new ideas, and so it becomes so now it's filled with people who like new ideas, and who aren't bound by history. A lot of the countries that have been around for a long time are really trapped in their own history. And the United States is also a great melting pot of different cultures and ideas and thoughts, and it's a country which tends to encourage success, where you sort of see someone that did extremely well, and generally the reaction in the United States is good for that person. In most countries, it may shock people in the United States. In most countries, that's not the reaction. People tend to think, oh, that person did well because they screwed somebody else, or they try to rise beyond their station. That was really inappropriate of them to be so nouveau riche, to use a French word. And so that and Australia, for example, which is arguably similar to the United States in a lot of ways, but they tend to try to knock down people that have risen too high. They call it the tall poppy syndrome. Tall poppies get chopped. So I think that's really a good thing about the United States.
And when your friends came or your family came up to you and said, look, there's nations that can't do this. You're a guy, but you have some resources. What did you say or do or think?
Well, so I had a lot of friends of mine try to talk me out of starting a rocket company because they thought it was crazy. And one friend of mine made me watch a video of rockets blowing up. And there were just lots of people that thought it was a really crazy idea, and there was some people that had tried to start rocket companies, not succeeded, and they tried to talk me out of it. And but the thing is that the premise for talking me out of it was, well, we think you're going to lose the money that you invest. And I was like, well, that was my expectation anyway, so I don't really mind if I lose. I might, but I mean, it's not like I was trying to figure out the rank ordered best way to invest money, and on that basis, chose space.
Right.
It's not like that's. I thought, wow.
You weren't looking at like money market bonds, AAA bonds,
right, exactly.
rocket company.
Like
you weren't like
do real estate.
Yeah,
invest in shoemaking, anything. And space is highest ROI.
Exactly.
That is not what I. That wasn't the premise. I just thought that it was important that humanity expand beyond Earth, and we weren't doing that. So maybe there was something I could do to kind of spur that on. And then I was able to compress the costs of the spacecraft and everything down to a relatively manageable number, and I got stuck on the rocket. The U.S. rockets were way too expensive. I ended up going to Russia, flew to Russia 3 times to negotiate purchase of an ICBM. I tried to buy 2 of the biggest ICBMs in the Russian fleet in 2001 and 2002. And I actually negotiated a price.
I'll just let that statement stand. I'm not even going to...
I mean, that's...
actually, I have to... Like, who did you call?
You open the yellow pages.
Yeah.
Go to ICBMs.
The market. I mean, how does this... I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I am curious, just this one particular thing. You decided at some point you need to buy an ICBM.
Yeah. Well, actually, at first I tried to buy just a normal launch vehicle that they used to launch satellites. But those were too expensive.
I see. I see.
The Boeing Delta II would have cost $65 million each, and So 2 would have been 130, and then I was like, whoa, okay, that breaks my budget right there.
Yeah.
If you say, what is a rocket made of? And say, okay, it's made of aluminum, titanium, some copper, carbon fiber if you want to go that direction. And you can break down and say, what is the raw material cost of all these components? And if you have them stacked on the floor and could wave a magic wand so that the cost of rearranging the atoms was 0, then what would the cost of the rocket be?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, okay, it's really small. It's like, 2% of what a rocket costs.
Right.
So clearly be in how the atoms are arranged.
Right.
The other, so you got to figure out sort of, okay, how can we get the atoms in the right shape much more efficiently?
Yeah.
And so I had a series of meetings on Saturdays with people that were, some of whom were still working at the big aerospace companies, just to try to figure out, is there some catch here that I'm not appreciating? And I couldn't figure out, there doesn't seem to be any catch, so started SpaceX.
First of all, it's not that I personally want to go to Mars. It's just that, as I said, I think it's extremely important that life become multiplanetary. And so you might say, well, why do I think it's important? Aren't there lots of important things going on Earth that should be addressed? And certainly there are. And it's not, I don't mean that it's important to the exclusion of all other things, just that it makes sense to spend a small amount of our resources on doing this. And the reason it's important is if you go to the nature of importance itself. How do you decide that anything is important? Well, the lens of history is a good way to filter more versus less important things. And as you zoom out further and further, the really important stuff stays and the less important stuff goes away. And now let's say you zoom out really far and look at the entire history of Earth, or history of life itself. What are the most important elements in the history of life itself? Forget about the parochial concerns of humanity. What would any intelligent species say? Oh, those were really important items. Well, there's obviously single-celled life, multicellular life, plants and animals. The animals, things going out of the ocean onto land. The advent of mammals, consciousness. There's about maybe 10 or so big ones on that list. And on that list will also fit the extension of life to multiple planets for the first time. It would be at least as important as life going from the oceans to land, and arguably more important because life could go gradually from the oceans to land, and if it's got a little uncomfortable on the beach, you could hop back in the ocean. But extending life to another planet is a huge quantum leap. You have to go hundreds of millions of miles across an extremely hostile environment to a planet which is completely unlike anything you've evolved to live on. That's just really an extremely difficult problem. In fact, I think it's an impossible problem without the advent of consciousness. So consciousness is a necessary precursor for that. I do want to go to space, and eventually it would be really cool if I could go to Mars. That would be super awesome. But this is not about me getting to space. It's really about enabling others to get to space. It's about enabling the extension of life beyond Earth. So I'd like to go in the first one, but I actually, if I didn't have all these so much depending on me, I would actually. Early in life, I could buy it. I get paid minimum wage. Actually, I don't even get overtime. But not being motivated personally by money is not the same as saying that I think SpaceX shouldn't make money. In fact, it's very important that SpaceX is profitable, or we will not be able to earn the money necessary to continue future developments, because the company's at a scale right now where I can't afford to just personally fund it and not get any, and the reason it's called Tesla is because we use an AC induction motor, which is an architecture that Tesla developed, and the guy probably deserves a little more play than he gets in current society. But on balance, I'm a bigger fan of Edison than Tesla, because Edison brought his stuff to market and made those inventions accessible to the world, whereas Tesla didn't really do that. Right. So he'd certainly be a big one, I thought. As far as role models, I think, there's obviously some of the obvious role models. I think Edison was certainly a role model, probably one of the biggest role models.
Did you study Edison's life?
Yeah, I read books about him, absolutely. And it's an interesting contrast, like Edison versus Tesla, because interesting, the car company is called Tesla.
Great.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve.
Are you motivated beyond just profit motive and racking up dollars? And
Yeah, no, I'm a volunteer. I mean, I don't need the money. There's nothing. It's not like I'm sitting here saying I wish I could buy such and such a thing. The great technologists, Steve Jobs at Apple, Bill Gates. I actually thought Disney was a pretty good innovator. And then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week.
Gosh,
And
it's
then
a lot of work.
all those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.